Hey guys, this is Go, the travel podcast. Today, I'm going to take you to Argentina. Argentina is known for mate, tango, horses, the best steak in the world, and gauchos. The wine in Mendoza is pretty good too, and Patagonia's amazing. Not the outdoor brand, but the mountain range. So this one time, I bought a one-way ticket to Argentina and lived there for 6 months. This was back when I just got out of the military. I spent 4.5 years in the Marine Corps. Marines are stationed all over the world and on Navy ships in every ocean. Marines are even stationed at every U.S. embassy, so at any point in time, you're not more than a few hundred miles from a U.S. Marine. Now, I couldn't wait to get out of the military, to no longer have to carry a gun, to take orders, or use the bathroom in a porta-john in Afghanistan in the middle of August. Now, the first thing I wanted to do when I got out was leave the country and travel. Having been to 2 wars makes you consider a lot of things you haven't done in life, and travel was one of those. I'd never been south of the equator, so I bought a one-way ticket to Buenos Aires, Argentina. I flew out of the LaGuardia airport in New York the day after Christmas. It was cold, and the roads were slushy and icy. When we have winters in New York, Buenos Aires is having their summer. That's a nice thing about flying south of the equator in December. I booked an apartment for 1 month in an area of the city called Palermo, Soho. It's located in the Palermo district of Buenos Aires. Now, everything in the district used to just be called Palermo, but each little neighborhood had its own distinct vibe, and so they started adding words like Soho and Hollywood at the end of them to make them distinct. Palermo Soho was kind of like the up-and-coming neighborhood, cheap enough to afford, somewhat safe, and close to a lot of art and cheap bars and restaurants. My apartment was on the 3rd floor of this really old building. It had an elevator that didn't work and a narrow courtyard in the middle of the building that all the apartments could look down into. There was this guy on the 1st floor who loved to blast his music. And right above me, there was a baby who just loved to cry at any possible moment. But I'd still sleep with the windows open. I loved letting the cool air in and hearing all the unfamiliar sounds. And that's kind of what I love about traveling. Everything is unfamiliar. The language, the currency, the food, everything. Now at home, you don't realize how unfamiliar you can become to these ambient sounds. Things like the cars, the police sirens, the barking dogs. I mean, these are things I stopped noticing back home in the States. But these noises are a little different overseas, and they kind of become the soundtrack of your life when you step foot on foreign soil. And you start noticing these subtle differences. Things like the trees that line nearly every street in Buenos Aires. The most common ones are La Tipuana trees, or La Tipa is what the locals call them. I was never the kind of person to appreciate trees, but La Tipa are these really cool trees native to Argentina. Their trunks twist upward before bending and branching off in completely random directions at the top. Their leaves are light green, and high up in the middle of the street, the trees from both sides will meet at the top and create a nice shady canopy covering the entire street. They're considered sad trees and are said to weep in the spring and summer when they sweat these weird droplets that fall from their leaves. Sometimes a small gust of wind will make it seem like it's raining if you're standing right underneath one. There are a lot of things you have to learn when you live in a new city, like, is it okay to jaywalk here? It might not be legal, but in a lot of cities, jaywalking is more socially acceptable than in others. Jaywalking is pretty normal here, but not the safest thing to do. There are other things you need to know, like, do drivers obey the stop signs? Well, not really. Now, if you don't know the word for stop in Spanish, it's pare. And it's on every stop sign in Buenos Aires. Now, most cab drivers in Buenos Aires don't know that, but these red octagonal signs are pretty much just suggestions for drivers to kind of stop if they want to. Now, after I got settled into my apartment, I signed up for Spanish-speaking classes at the University of Buenos Aires. We called it La UBA for short. At the end of the program, they gave you an official certificate from the university, which was one of the reasons I signed up. I thought it'd be cool to have a certificate from the University of Buenos Aires. Now, it was an intensive 1-month program 5 days a week for 3 hours a day in a windowless room without air conditioning. The building was cool. It was full of marble staircases and marble pillars, and it was located right in downtown Buenos Aires near the Casa Rosado. And Casa Rosado stands for Rose House. That's where the president of Argentina lives. I took the subte, which is the name for the subway system in Buenos Aires. Subte comes from the word subterráneo, which means subterranean. It first opened in 1913, and the stations, at least the original ones, are a real relic of the past. Now, getting to the subway station can be a little tricky. So these latipa trees, they like to tear up the sidewalk with their roots. And the dogs here, they love to poop where you're most likely to step in it. Anyway, I scraped the poo off my shoe and went to my first Spanish class. But taking that class did more harm to my Spanish speaking abilities than good. And the reason is, I was in a class with other English-speaking people, kind of like I was. And they were essentially on a long vacation, like me too. So we ended up hanging out with each other a lot and not getting enough exposure to the Spanish language. Anyway, when I first got to class, I tried sitting next to people who looked like I could be friends with. There was this guy who looked like a cooler version of myself. He had long hair and a beard, but he didn't speak a lick of English, so that never worked out. Then there was this couple. One was from the UK, the other from the States, and they were both really cool. And I hung out with this couple from London who were really awesome as well. But then I met these Brazilians. So there are a couple of things you need to know about Brazilians. One is they're crazy, and two, a lot of them like to vacation in Buenos Aires. Now, there are two types of crazy. The crazy you want to stay away from, and the crazy you want to hang out with. These two Brazilian girls were spending the summer in Buenos Aires, and for them, every night was a Friday night. We'd explore the wildest places, like La Bamba Tiempo. La Bamba Tiempo translates into the time bomb, and what it is an outdoor concert in a venue called Connex. Doors open at 6 p.m. every Monday, and it's one of the few places to party and dance during the day in Buenos Aires. Now, if you're new to the city, you can meet a lot of Americans, Brits, and other travelers just while standing in line to get in. I probably went 5 or 6 times. It's also a good place to score some weed if that's your thing. Now, when you get inside, an ensemble group dressed in red starts drumming, slowly first, as people are making their way inside. The pace picks up every few minutes, while the alcohol starts to loosen the crowd. Then the pace speeds up. Nobody is standing still. You can't. Everyone is jumping and dancing. Here's also where I met Ron. So I was walking through the crowd to get a beer for me and my friends. I squeezed a sweaty arm onto the bar to try and get the bartender's attention. And there was this older guy, about 50 years old. He was sitting in the stool next to where I was standing. "What do you need?" he asked me. "I need 3 beers, I told him. He was cool. He got the bartender's attention for me. "Well, why aren't you dancing?" I asked him. "I'm too old to do that. I just came here for the women," he said, and he winked at me. He told me his aunt dated Charles Bukowski long ago, which I thought was pretty cool. Ron himself looked a little like Bukowski, except with more hair on his head and cleaner clothes. He liked to talk literature. I grabbed his email and told him that we should meet up to discuss at some other time. Because right now, I have 2 Brazilians waiting for some beer, and the last thing you want to do is anger a sober Brazilian. Anyway, we went out a ton, but doing it this early was kind of unusual. There's something you have to understand about the nightlife in Buenos Aires, and it's that they don't start partying until really, really late. So the first time I went out, it was on a Saturday night, and I invited everyone in my Spanish class. I told them I'll be at this place called the Roxy Bar in Palermo, Hollywood at around 11 p.m. Well, when I showed up, it was just me and the bartender for like an entire hour. She was chopping limes and stacking liquor bottles. She probably thought I had a drinking problem for showing up so early. I thought the Roxy Bar was going to be lame, but by around 1 a.m., the place started to really fill up, and by 3 a.m., it was packed. I never went out until well past midnight after that. This one night, a bunch of us went out until 7 a.m., and we didn't even know it was 7 a.m. until they kicked everyone out by simply opening up these 2 massive doors and letting a bunch of blue sky shine into the room. At this place called Club America, spelled with a K, bubbles like the kind you'd find in your bubble bath just start falling from the ceiling, and it ends up rising right up to about chest height. But don't drop your phone because you'll get frantic like I did. My friends helped me find it, which requires holding your breath and diving underneath the foam, and you'll end up coming out soaking wet. Anyway, I've got a lot more stories for you guys on Argentina. Just hold on for one quick break. Today's episode is sponsored by TravelToBlank.com. Travel to Blank has dozens of comprehensive travel guides for places like Bogota, Colombia, Helsinki, Finland, and even an 18-day itinerary for China. Best part about it, it's all free and on their website. These city guides list places you have to see, experience, and photograph while you're there. They even have an amazing blog with tips like how to improve your travel photos and how to overcome your fear of flying. Check them out at TravelToBlank.com. Rio de la Plata. It's the widest river in the world, and the city of Buenos Aires sits right along its southwestern edge. On the other side of the river, about a 2.5-hour ferry ride, is the city of Montevideo, Uruguay. A group of us decided to go out and get a little fancy at this place that overlooked the river. It was a real swanky place. You had to dress nice to get in. And of course, the ladies got in free. Nothing memorable happened that night, but I do remember the cab ride getting there was cheap. About 12 pesos or something, a little less than $4. The cab ride home at 7 a.m. was not cheap at all. The cab drivers would drive up and only let people into their cabs that were willing to pay 200 pesos. Yes, 200 pesos, or about $50 at the time. I was with the Brazilians again, and we were not going to pay that. It might be a 45-minute walk, and we were tired, but it's the principle of the matter. And we also didn't have 200 pesos on us. We spent it on the overpriced drinks inside. The cabs would come once every couple of minutes. There were at least 150 people that needed a ride home, so the place got to be a madhouse. People were jumping into cabs and refusing to get out. People were fighting for a cab until they realized they couldn't afford it. One woman was even hitting her boyfriend with her purse, and then she took off her heels and threw him into the river and stormed off. The girls and I just started walking. We couldn't deal with this. People in suits and cocktail dresses fighting in the streets for a dirty cab wasn't really our thing. We didn't know exactly how to get home from there, but we knew we had to head west. Now, every now and then a cab would come screaming down the street, and we'd try to wave it down, but they never stopped. Now, the girls were getting angry at this point, and so I ran into the street to try and stop the next cab. The guy slowed down for me like he was going to stop, but as soon as I got around to his side of the window, he would hit the gas and was gone. So the ladies, they were tired of wearing their heels, understandably. So they took them off and started walking barefoot. They'd been in heels for 7 hours at this point. I couldn't last 7 minutes in those things. We keep walking until we see an 8-lane highway that, if we crossed, would have been a really, really good shortcut. Now, it was a Sunday morning, so not too many cars were on the road. We hopped over the guardrails and start running across the street when a cop car comes out of nowhere with his sirens blaring to ask us what the hell we were doing. The girls told him sweetly that we're trying to get home. So this cop flags down an ambulance coming down the highway and tells them to take us home. They were really nice people. We had them drop us off at a cafe instead, because it was the morning and we were really hungry. The standard breakfast in Buenos Aires consists of a very small croissant, an espresso, and a tiny glass of sparkling water. The croissant is called a media luna, which means half moon in Spanish. It's like the perfect thing to eat after a night of drinking. In Argentina, they eat a lot of steak, which takes longer to digest. So if you had steak for dinner, then you're probably not that hungry in the morning. The first time I ordered a cup of coffee in Buenos Aires, I made 2 mistakes. I thought saying the Spanish word for order was how you ordered a coffee. Well, I was wrong. Instead, it kind of translated into me saying something like, I order you to get me a coffee. So don't use the word orden when you're talking to a waiter. Instead, say, te pido un café. Te pido translates into I ask you. So te pido un café means I ask you for a coffee. But when you ask for un café, this means an espresso shot, not coffee like I'm used to in the States. Sometimes it can also mean instant coffee depending on where you go. So asking for an Americano is your best bet if you're looking for a standard American cup of coffee. I made a lot of mistakes when I first got to Argentina, like sticking my hand out to shake someone's hand. That's considered very rude. Everyone in Argentina greets with a quick side kiss on the cheek. It took a bit of getting used to, I'll be honest, since putting your cheek up against the cheek of someone you've only recently met can feel a little weird. But you kind of have to expect your boundaries are going to be broken, right? And that's why a lot of us travel in the first place. It can help open up your mind to new perspectives. You can meet new people, make new friends, and make mistakes. And mistakes can even be blessings if you learn from them. On the next episode, we're going to keep exploring Argentina. Like, why is Argentine steak the best in the world? I'm going to tell you about the amazing Recoleta Cemetery and about the time I worked on a horse ranch for a whole month with Argentine gauchos. Last but not least, don't forget to subscribe to us on iTunes and check out the website gothepodcast.com for lots of cool photos and a cool little blog write-up that I did on this podcast episode. Follow us on Facebook, like us on Twitter. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and follow us on Instagram. Thank you for listening to Go the Travel Podcast. I'm your host, Alex Walensky.